The announcement yesterday by Eton that it's going to raise its fees by 20% in response to the removal of VAT exemptions on private education is a significant moment in the ongoing debate over the role and funding of independent schools in the UK and their charitable status. And this move, which is expected to take effect in January, follows Labour's manifesto pledge to remove tax breaks for private schools, a policy intended to address perceived inequalities between private and state education. It is the first time that VAT will be imposed on education in any form. The VAT exemption for private schools has long been a contentious issue. The charitable status of private schools has long been a contentious issue, and the VAT solution is one way to address some of that contention. Independent schools, many of which are registered charities, have benefited from various tax breaks, including exemption from VAT. And the rationale behind this exemption has been the charitable status of these institutions, which historically justified their tax benefits by claiming to provide public benefits and such as scholarships and bursaries. I certainly know this. I was in receipt of one. However, critics have argued that these tax breaks disproportionately favour the wealthy, perpetuating educational inequality. As I say, I was in receipt of one, and I don't believe myself to be wealthy. Nor do I believe there is such a thing, or I certainly haven't accessed such a thing as, quote, the old boys club. But I did go eventually to Oxford, certainly not directly from school, and in some ways I probably went to Oxford in spite of my school rather than because of it. Did I benefit from an independent, from a private education? Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I'd stopped halfway through, where would I have gone? I certainly wouldn't have gone into a grammar school because I didn't have the 11 plus. And grammar schools existed. There was a very good grammar school down the road from where I used to live. And in some ways, if I wanted a good academic education, that would have been the place to have gone. Grammar schools do a superb job and have always done a superb job in sorting out the inequalities of education. Grammar schools were a wonderful way to level up and were a demonstration of our commitment to merit, a meritocracy, that children were able to improve their academic options by going to a selective grammar school. I think the grammar school system, I'm sorry that it's been abolished in so many parts of the country, but I think I taught in a grammar school for a while. I think the grammar school system could be greatly improved by a methodology which would allow entrance at different times over the school period, so at 11 plus, at before GCSE level, and for A level. That would be appropriate. It's much harder to enter a grammar school after the 11 plus, and it should be significantly easier. We should be providing access to equality rather than denying equality. And Eton's plans to transfer all the responsibility for the VAT rise to parents, who almost certainly, if your child is going to Eton and you're not on a bursary, then you can afford to pay a slight hike in fees. But if I'm right, the amount they're paying, they're transferring the money to a new figure of £63. If you take the 20% VAT off that, that would give them a net amount of £50,400, as opposed to the previous amount of £52,749. So that means Eton is in fact losing £2,251 in its school fees per student. So either something has gone wrong with the maths, or it's been significantly more proactive than it actually claims to be. Labour's policy about imposing VAT on private school fees alongside applying business rates aims to raise approximately 1.5 billion annually, and these funds are earmarked for reinvestment in the state education system, with proposals to hire thousands of new teachers and establish new nurseries. The underlying philosophy is to redistribute resources in a manner that benefits the broader public, particularly in the context where the gap between private and state school outcomes has been widening. And I entirely agree with the concept. I don't agree with the solution. So the problem is something which is recognizable. The solution is not. Simply by taking money and putting it into advertising for new teachers is not going to actually produce those new teachers, certainly not of any quality. And what we need is a new way of secondary school education. And that, I think, needs to make use of new media and to buy in resources which can be switched on, rather than a lot of paperwork which is essentially lesson plans and slightly dull and slightly unusable, unuseful, not useful, slightly impenetrable in so many ways. Simply decoration. Decorative paper is not education. And we need to stop paper shuffling. We need to teach students in secondary school how to take notes, how to write essays, how to do maths. And everything else is a form of decoration. We also need to ensure that students in secondary education have good access to foreign languages. Foreign languages is not about communicating in other countries, it's about developing the mind so that one is thinking in multiple languages and therefore thinking in the abstract. The decision to pass on the full VAT to parents, which results in this fee of £63,000 thereabouts, but as I've said, it's not quite, is emblematic of the challenges faced by elite private schools under this new policy. The smaller private schools are going to suffer disproportionately. While pupils on full bursaries will be shielded from the increase, the majority of students who come from more affluent backgrounds maybe will bear the financial burden, and this could lead to further stratification within the independent state school sector, where only the wealthiest families can now afford the rising costs, potentially reducing the diversity of student bodies. The broader implications of this policy are multifaceted. On the one hand, it challenges the privileged status of independent schools, pushing them to contribute more substantially to public finances. On the other hand, it raises questions about the sustainability of the private educational model in its current form, especially for schools that cannot absorb the additional costs without significant fee hikes. And critics of the VAT imposition argue that it amounts to a tax on education, which could have unintended consequences, such as driving some parents out of the private sector and increasing pressure on state schools to accommodate huge numbers of formerly private school students. And part of the problem of the state school is the already overwhelming class size. There's concern about the timing of the policy's implementation, as highlighted by Lord Waldegrave of Eton, who expressed disappointment that the VAT would be introduced midway through an academic year, leaving little time for families to adjust. And proponents see this as a necessary step towards a fairer education system where the wealthiest contribute more to the public good. But the debate ultimately centres on differing views about the role of private education in society and how best to achieve educational equity, and whether school is the right place to indulge in this sort of social reform. The imposition of VAT on school fees, on private school fees, exemplified by Eton's fee increase, represents a significant shift in the landscape of UK education, and I don't think a positive one. I think we could certainly consider any form of hike in fees if it's going to then be passed on to an improvement in education, but simply a bland statement about recruiting new teachers. It's like saying we're going to recruit new police. Recruiting new police, recruiting new teachers doesn't mean we're actually doing it. And even if we have more teachers, even if we have more police, even if we have more nurses, the systems themselves need to be greatly improved. And that requires significant investment and significant forethought. This is a debate not about education, but about fairness, privilege, and the responsibility of private institutions to contribute to the public good. And the outcome of this policy change, I think, will shape not so much private education, the debate about private education, but the debate about parity and the debate about the distribution of wealth in the UK. And I think we shall see more of this. But I don't necessarily think this will benefit education at all, and that is sad, because it's something which is wheeled out to do one thing, but in fact it's going to do something else.